Well, welcome back. Robbie has described to you earlier, how dangerous and complex the world is at the moment, and what I would say is that a lot of how this country will weather all this turmoil and chaos would depend very much on how strong the Australian economy is, right? But the news is not entirely good, unfortunately. So in part two, I would describe to you what the situation is. Now, the first part I said it was lucky, Australia was lucky in weathering the GFC, right? This part I will explain how the Australian economy depends entirely on luck. And some people will, Mr. Man Waring has, during the break, has mentioned how neoliberalism runs all the government departments, according to his experience. So that is correct, in fact, because since the early 80s, the Australian government has decided that it doesn't want to have any planning. I mean, the economy should be entirely up to the free market. It's called the laissez-faire policy of neoliberalism, right? Which means that the market should decide. The market should decide on. The market should decide on where to allocate the resources. In other words, and how do you do that, right? There is an economic theory which has been taught at university since the early 80s, which is neoclassical economics or market approach, right? So that has led to deregulation. In other words, like for example, the banking system used to be highly regulated even in the 80s, where government has a lot more say on, let's say, mortgages. They will set bans on what banks are allowed to charge in various things. But since at least since the mid 80s onwards, all of that has been deregulated, but in order not to scare people too much, they still have regulators, right? So that's why I call this fake regulation, because they really didn't want to regulate, but they still have some sort of people, some sort of regulators appearing to regulate. But the reality is the credit and money, most of the money are created by the private banks, the major banks. They create money by lending, by the fractional reserve system. They create money when they give out the loan simultaneously. Basically, they give you a loan, and at the same time, they give you a bank account, a deposit, right? I mean, it sounds strange. They don't have the money, but they create two loans, basically, right? And so the banks control where credit goes, and therefore they actually control the economy. And so where the economy goes entirely depends on where they think they make the most profit. Okay? So just to recap what I said, in the short term, it was luck in the GFC. The globalization expanded the trade and allowed also tends to have greater immigration. However, a lot of people have not noticed that there is a gradual decline in economic growth, which I've shown you previously. Now, from this particular talk, I would concentrate on a few items of what describes the Australian economy. A lot of superannuation performance, which I've done a lot of research on, it's in fact illusory. I mean, because there is a danger that suddenly a lot of wealth would evaporate. But today I'm not going to talk about that. I'll talk about the income inequality that comes from this laissez-faire economy. And also show you how the housing bubble was actually created by the banks, not government, right? And how it's financed by a lot of foreign debt. And also the long-term consequences are the structure of the economy, where more and more goods are imported rather than produced and manufactured in this country. So the de facto economic policy, therefore, is driven entirely by bank profits, right? And therefore, where the profit is, so the economy has no direct clear path. It all depends on where the opportunity is, and you just, and therefore where the economy is at any time is entirely luck. Where no one says we should have this much of this or this much of that. And the idea is that we should let the economy do its own thing, free market, whatever. And the government only comes in when there are crashes, or recessions. That's a time when the government intervene, right? And the rationale of this is that it was articulated by Alan Greenspan, United States, that we can't predict whether something's a bubble, and we can't predict when it bursts. So it is government policy, which a lot of people don't really understand, or not allowed to understand, is that government only comes in when everything, collapses. That is the fundamental policy in most developed countries. So basically, it ends up being neoclassical free market in good times, when everything's going well, anybody can do whatever they like. And then Keynesian government intervention in bad times. So when the financial crisis comes, there'll be bailouts, potentially now bail-ins, right? So the problem with this system is that it ends up being privatization of profits and socialization of losses. Because when the times are good, the banks make all the money and put it in the pocket. When the proverbial hits the fan, the government used taxpayer money to save the system, again, for the banks. So over time, there has been major and minor hiccups, right? Over time, you have this particular situation. Since the early 80s, you see that the top 1% of people has gained share. This is a share of national income from 5% to about 10%, nearly double. So their share, the top 1% share, has doubled. And the top 10% has also increased, the top curve has also increased substantially, right? Now this situation is the same all over the world, not all over the world, but in the, at least in the US and the Australian economy. So this chart comes from the latest Productivity Commission report, which uses the same data as the chart I've shown you earlier, all right, just last chart. But this one shows you the top 1% for Australia at the bottom, and then UK next, and United States there. So you can see that the income inequality is greater for these countries. But Australia is always following US and UK. as Donald Horne says, they use other people's ideas. So that's that is an example. So eventually, we may catch up. So another chart that I show you is at different sections. This is Australian employee compensation. It is this is my calculation. The top 1% is given by this one, and the left axis is the average thousands of dollars per annum. So the average person in the top 1% gets about $600,000 a year, right? And the next 9%, right, is down here, right, up to about 150, and then the bottom 90% is about the $50,000 level. So you can see that there is, widespread income inequality. Now, if you look at the bottom chart's hard to see it in detail, so I'll expand that in the next chart. So it's up to 50 odd. The red line is when the Hawke-Keating government came in, right? You can see that it's actually at the bottom 90%. Bottom 90% is actually done poorly, relatively poorly, under the Labor government. Paradoxically, the Howard government produced better results. And then this is the Rudd-Gillard era. It's continued a bit, and now it's the latest Liberal coalition government here, right? Now, in contrast, the top 1% has a continuous rise, right? So you can see that they're triple they basically triple in wealth on average, the top 1%. Now, part of this income inequality it's due to the fact that interest rates have been going down all the time, and because interest rate gets lower, there are more and more debt, because if interest rate is lower, you can take on more debt, right? So it is basically the banking policy, right? The major bank decides that lending is the most profitable, particularly if you can create a bubble, right? If you're in a bubble, everything goes up and profit is assured. And a lot of people think that all this is partly the government's fault or whatever, but it's not. The government actually doesn't do much except to make sure that all the banks obey, agree to a certain standard, a certain way of doing things, so that none of them would endanger the system, right? The justification for the banks to lower their risk weighting, right, the way that they lend, is through their risk modelling. Only banks have all the data that they capture from lending, and they argue for certain level of risk for different types of lending. Basically what they're saying is that, look, business lending is less efficient than lending to housing. And so I'll explain a bit more, give you a bit more data next. And the quickest way to make money, of course, is creating asset bubbles. And asset bubbles are created by lowering the perception of risk. So, and one of the ways to see this also is the general environment of constantly lower interest rates. Now, the red line is the interbank cash rate, which when it's smooth in this part here, it's essentially the official cash rate, the Reserve Bank interest rate. So that's what that is. And the green line is the standard variable mortgage interest rate. So you can see that they follow together. But the spread, in other words, the perceived risk that the bank want to charge you varies. So right now, in recent times, it's very much wider spread, right? And the property bubbles, it's largely driven by this constantly lower interest rate. So lower interest rate is not necessarily a good thing. You can see because for people that are buying the property, they've got to borrow a lot more money, right? Because house prices going up, you can afford to pay, have a bigger debt because you can afford to service it. Now, okay, well, the way that the housing bubbles develop is due to this thing here, the risk weighting. The major banks run this internal risk-based model, and they argue for the fact that this should be the risk weight for mortgages. So it's falling lower and lower, and the impact of that is that the housing loans, as a percentage of all loans made by the bank, goes up. Now it's to about above 60%. Right? And the impact of this situation is that housing loan goes up, as in the blue chart, from like that, and what's left over will be given to the business. So business lending goes down like that. It's half, and basically, and the problem with this lending practice, right, is that the business sector are being starved of funding, and so the trend for the last 30 or 40 years has been in the production sector. There are quite a few sectors in the economy, obviously, and the production sector has manufacturing, which has been declined like that, right? And the so-called construction, the construction sector has held on to about from 7% for quite a while, and then it's in recent time, due to particularly the second part of the housing bubble, has gone up, right? And the mining has gone up, particularly towards the end with the resources boom and the China trade, and the agricultural sector has gradual decline, right? I mean, this is relative to the whole economy, right? So in absolute terms, you know, the agricultural sector is still increasing because the whole economy is increasing, but relative to the rest of the economy, it's actually being in a slow decline. The next is the infrastructure sector. Now, if you look at the utility, it's had quite a steep drop in the last few decades. Utilities being water, electricity, that sort of thing. Transport has done reasonably well, maintaining share, but even information has been quite volatile, and the NBN is not all that.
In utilities, you know, like the government funds it out of their own funds is not reported there on that graph. So the utilities.
I think it would be. They're
not investing in it.
Yeah. It would be included the way that ABS would be doing it. In any case, government has been privatising a lot of their assets. So more and more things.
The funding of the new capital works is still funded by them nationally, anyway. Yeah.
Well, that would be the government budgeting. It would be included. It would be included here. You know, because it's a gross value added. Okay. So this shows you the gradual decline of the goods economy. I I call the production sector and the infrastructure sector, the goods part of the economy. And the sector that is, of course, growing is the financial services sector, finance, insurance, and to some extent, real estate has kept pace.
The economy's on fire.
On fire, yes. So the overall impact of all these different parts of the economy is that the goods, the production and infrastructure sector has been declining like that relatively, and whereas the commercial, finance and services sector has gone up like that. So basically, we have what we call what I call a bank-run laissez-faire economy, right? And banks been starved of credit relatively, has retarded the real economy, and a lot of the finance have gone into financial speculation. And with the approval of the regulators basically are not doing much in terms of telling the bank what to do, just so long as they are reasonably, reasonably well behaved. And half the time the regulators don't even know how well or how badly they behave, because it's who was it that says that they don't, the regulator don't deal with fraud? Is it
Alan Greenspan.
Alan Greenspan, that's right. Yeah, mainly because it's part of the economic theory that the markets are efficient, that people take risk and buy things with full knowledge of what's happening. That's the assumption of the economic theory, and of course it's untrue, and so it leads to a great deal of problems.
Excuse me, on regulation, how can APRA, a small regulation mechanism in Australia, basically have any say or control over the worldwide interlocking banking system?
Good point. Yeah, good point. I mean, with globalization, I think the argument is that because the banks have to deal with each other, we need a global regulator, right? And so all your self-determination, what a sovereign state like Australia wants to do about banking and finance, it's not allowed. I mean, because you need to be in agreement with everybody else. So basically, I would say that Australia doesn't have any real say in how the finance sector is run. And in fact, recently when Australia was a little bit, shall we say, unclear or ambiguous about bail-in, right? The IMF come out and say, look, don't be ambiguous. We want you to be more forceful. State very clearly that you can bail in. So I mean, Australia is not master of its own fate, and anyway, the upshot of such an economy is that temporarily, when the housing bubble is going well, it masks a lot of problems because people are at least saying, we're getting wealthier, right? And basically, the banks cause the income inequality by transferring wealth. The bank transfer about $20 or $30 billion a year in additional to to what they should have from superannuation alone. And of course, they made a lot of money through this mortgage and mortgage fraud and so on. So basically, in the good times, in normal times, banks rob people their money through all sorts of fees in superannuation, insurance, and financial services. And in a time of crisis, right, government helps the bank to rob people of their wealth through low interest rates, bailouts and bail-ins. So the economy is vulnerable in a financial crisis because there is structural problems in the real economy itself, and then there are also financial problems, which I would talk about now. Okay, so the current account deficit. Now this chart again shows real dollars in green on the left axis, right? Where is it? So green, and then the left axis is dollars, right? Billions of dollars, right? And the right axis is the same data, but relative to the GDP, relative to the size of the economy. Okay. So in 1991, around that time, Paul Keating says we're in the danger of being a banana republic, right? So that was then, but nothing much has changed. You can see that the red dots, we're still running the same, relatively same level of current account deficit in terms of GDP, and even worse in actual dollar terms, right? Billions of dollars. Now, what this current account deficit tells you is that the amount of money that we need to give to foreign countries, right, minus the amount of money the foreign country gives to us. So we need to give the foreign country a lot more money because we owe them a lot more. And the next chart will tell you how the current account deficit is composed. So this is just a cumulative dollar. You just add every year cumulative current account balance. So the total is the blue. Oops, sorry. The total is the blue chart, right? The blue line. The green line is the trade balance. From each year we import more than we export. So add up to this, right? Again, this is in billions of dollars, right? Hundreds of. So the current account, running balance of the current account is about $1.2 trillion, 1,200 billion. And the red line, which a lot of people may not be aware of, is what they call primary income. Primary income is to do with investment payments. So if a foreign country buys up some asset, whether a farm or a business, right? They make money every year and they remit that money back to the foreign country. That's what you owe them, right? In reverse, when Australian superannuation funds invest in overseas stocks and shares, let's say, then the income from that is income to Australia. So this line tells you the difference. So Australia pays out more than we take back in, and cumulatively it's worth nearly $1 trillion. Now the next thing is to look at what about the banking situation in relation to these things. Now this is the Australian banks and registered financial corporation, the sum of all those things. These are liabilities. So in other words, it's sort of like more or less like borrowing, if you like. Now the thing I want to point out is that the blue part, right, is this gives you an indication of where we borrow from, right? The banks, where the banks borrow from overseas. A lot is from UK, the blue part, right? UK, and the grey part is United States. So just those two countries alone, it accounts for most of the developed world financing. The difference between the red and the green is the rest of the world, all the developing countries. So that's a total. Now, the greatest danger, in the short term, is the short-term liabilities, which is debt, which is the bank borrow short-term debt because it's cheaper, low interest rate, right? But the thing with short-term debt is that it needs to be rolled over regularly. So as soon as after 90 days, you've got to borrow again, right? And in order to shore up your finances. So normally there's no problem. You just roll over your debt. But the thing is, even though the short-term debt is only a very small part of the total liability, it is still quite significant because the number tells you here, right? It's about $300 billion, right? It may not sound much, but the thing is, $300 billion is about the same as the value or equity of the Australian banks. Australian banks only have in their net asset of about the same, right? That's the risk in a financial crisis is that when a financial crisis hits, right? People don't want to lend anybody money. So the banks will have difficulty in rolling over this debt. In other words, they have to cough up, find somewhere to pay up $300 billion, right? And what could happen is that they may print money, and then trying to exchange Australian dollars for the foreign currency. This is in foreign currency. Now, any debt that is in Australian dollars is not a problem because they can just print the money and give to people, right? But it is when you borrow in a foreign currency, you can't print the foreign currency, right? So there's a great deal of uncertainty about how you're going to fix that, right? Now, basically, let me conclude here. So I've outlined a lot of different problems, but the overall effect can be summarized in this couple of quotes. What we have today is actually a global banking dictatorship, because they dictate where money goes, and a lot of and it's due to, firstly, the fractional reserve fiat currency system, right? So it means the bank can create and control an unlimited amount of money, right? Unlimited until there is problems, right? Now, this statement is truthfully, I checked that it's from Thomas Jefferson, is that I sincerely believe with you, right? The banking establishment are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but, right, swindling on a large scale, right? Now this second quote, right, is it's not sure that's from Jefferson, but some people attribute to it. But it's so good that it doesn't matter who says it, right? It summarizes the situation, right? So if the American people ever allow private banks, right, to control the issue of their money, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and the corporation will grow up around them, right? Will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent of their fathers conquered. So what's the evidence of anything of that happening? Well, this is the most recent chart. And America is the canary in the coal mine because Australia just basically follows the United States in many ways. And there you have the Los Angeles County homeless population. You can see they're rising. So these American, shall we say, founding fathers of democracy, knew what they were about. That you can't really allow private banks to run the country, but which is what has been happening in the last 30 to 40 years, and the result is for us to see. So the conclusion is about the Australian economy is controlled by speculative banks. It is structurally weak, gutted of productive capacity, heavily indebted to US and UK, which control its fate in many ways. Some of the ways are political, but I think economically as well.
Hi Wilson, let me go first. So, just for the benefit of the audience, if you can comment on Glass-Steagall, because Glass-Steagall doesn't end fractional reserve banking, but it does temper the way the system works quite a bit. If you could just describe how it has that impact.
Well, for a start, if the commercial bank, which lend to businesses and even home lending like they used to, is separated from all the investment banking activities, right? Then the government can direct its rescue money, for example, the bailout money, to the part that it wants, instead of it's all the financial speculation, or the derivative, all these things that cause the trouble, mainly because they leverage up risk. So in other words, when they make a lot of bad lending, right, they parcel up all these bad mortgages into, CDOs, these securities, and then they sell it onto somebody else, right? And in other words, they can create bad loans without consequences to themselves by passing off to somebody else. And not only that, on top of that, they know that they've got dodgy securities because the underlying loans are bad loans, right? They can go and bet using what is known as credit default swaps, right? Credit default swaps is like an insurance, right? So in other words, they go and buy insurance that these things, if they go sour, they collect money, right? They know that these things would go sour because they created it, right? And then they bet that they will go sour, and indeed when they did go sour, the bank collect money. So they're making money every which way. They make money by by selling dodgy security to other people, and then they bet that they're dodgy, and then they make money out of that.
And then they get all bonuses.
That's right.
Such a good job.
So that part of it, at least with Glass-Steagall, would stop, right? That part of the gambling, the second part, would stop. Now, it still doesn't stop people from making bad loans, bad decisions, But because it's separated, right, from the securitization, all those bad loans sits on the bank's balance sheet. So if the loan's gone sour, the banks suffer. There's no way of passing off all their problems to somebody else. Okay, so that's why Glass-Steagall works, because it doesn't allow all this manipulation to go on, because there's at least a war between two parts of the system.
Would it be even better if we had our own sovereign currency?
Well, we do have. I mean, the Australian dollar is you know, what you mean is that it'll be better if we don't have to borrow in foreign currency. Well, we don't have to borrow in foreign currency, really, right? But we do because the country itself is unable to provide all the money for the lending, and that's why they have to ask overseas people. You know, if the country was more productive, right, then it would create all the money it needs to do all the various things.
The gentleman's got a question. What about the role of the rating agencies?
Well, the rating agencies basically, shall we say, give an indication of the quality of the debt, right? And the quality of the debt sort of more or less have an impact on the interest rate, right? If an institution's got high reputation, then their debt they can borrow at lower interest rate. And at various times, the rating agency will give a rating on any particular debt as an indication of whether the debt is good or, you know, high quality or low quality. Now, the trouble with the rating agencies, they also can involve in fraud, which is what is known as pay for rating. You know, someone give the rating agency a bundle of some loans, equity or securities, and ask the rating agency to publicize a rating. And the fraud that comes in is that they pay them so that they get the rating they want, you know, rather than objective evaluation. So, you know, the industry has potentially a lot of problems because the assumptions of market, I mean, the Adam Smith free market really only applies to simple and transparent markets. You know, if you go to your open air farmers market, you know, you buy something dodgy, you know about it pretty quickly, right? And next time you won't go to the same grower to buy your produce, right? And so those markets work in terms of a free market. You know, you just, you know, pick and choose whatever you want because fraud doesn't really pay off very well in those markets. But in modern financial markets, there's so much money involved. You commit fraud and you get away with it, you can retire for life. You know? So I mean, there's a lot of lack of real understanding of the economics behind a lot of these policies. In my view, the economic profession is really a disgrace. You know, at university they teach them stuff that are just false, untrue, misleading, bad. You know, but no one seems to stop it. And when I try to write papers and tell them, you know, you guys are wrong, well, they just don't publish it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. That's been a very closely reasoned, overall perspective. However, you've stopped short of basically saying that the banking system is a international criminal cabal. And I'd just like to put a question to you in the panel that Trump has been elected backed by a military intelligence community which goes by the name of Q. They've been saying that Rothschild, Rockefeller, through big pharma, big banks, has basically wrought this system of debt slavery on the world, and it's time for it to be changed because it's about to fall anyway. I'd like to comment on that, please.
Well, I would generally agree with that. I mean, as a broad proposition, but exactly the details of what goes on, I'm not privy to.
Well, it's got to be an international movement.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I think the CEC is great in actually stirring up. It's not the first time that Australia has lead the world in some ideas, and now that there's a lot of people aware, of course, in the United States, UK, and even other countries. Yeah.
I hope that Q is right, but I'm not convinced that Q is authentic. One of the problems with the QAnon theory, the existence of this secret force behind Trump, is they've been really caught out badly being dishonest about Julian Assange, right? Claiming that he's actually, they were claiming he wasn't in the Ecuadorian embassy, he was secretly in the United States. Then they've revised that since that Trump just wants to get him over there so he can help expose the final elements of the deep state and put everyone in jail, etc. And so WikiLeaks has quite forcefully pushed back against that to say that the evidence seems to be that what Q exists for is to convince Trump's base that despite everything Trump is doing or perhaps being forced to do in public, that secretly he's still committed to the proper agenda, just to keep the base on side, right? And that's referred to as a Pied Piper operation. The real and if that works, then the risk becomes that the base do not force Trump to deliver on his promises, such as Glass-Steagall, which he campaigned on, because they assume, secretly it's happening, right? So that can actually be quite dangerous. But everything else about what it says needs to be done is actually true. You're right, it has to be an international movement, etc., which is why the CEC works internationally as well as in Australia. This is a global banking dictatorship, right? Glass-Steagall, we would never advocate an international law for anything, because then every time you sign up to international law as a country, you're giving up your sovereignty. But Glass-Steagall would work best if every country in the world did it, right? So that you can undercut the power of that global banking dictatorship. And if we can deal with what we know is happening, and praise Trump where it's due, but criticise him when it's due too, so that he feels the heat of that can actually, he's one guy, he's capable of throwing the toys out of the basket and go, no, stuff you all, I promise this, I'm going to do it, right? And that would be a great thing.
I would just like to elaborate on one point Dr. Syme made. It's very important in Australia that the domination of the banks that you're talking about is so massively supported by the economics profession, which dominates the government departments in every part of Australia, the state and federal governments. The key people are still those people that had a training in neoliberal economics in Australian universities. Now, what happens in these government departments is the same as happens in the universities. Those people that dominate with those ideas, they will not employ people with different ideas. So when they're looking for new people in, even now I would think, that are coming through for new jobs in the major economic departments in Australia, they are still employing the same neoliberal economists that are foisted on this country the policies that we've had for the last 30 or 40 years, I mean, this particularly started in the early 1980s, when this neoliberal economics took over the English-speaking world. So what this means is, I think, if you agree with the kinds of ideas that CEC pushes, is that these lobby groups that put forward these ideas are enormously important, because the government departments are not going to change. It's not going to change from within the government. It's got to be good, well-researched ideas coming from groups like CEC, in my opinion.
Yes, certainly. I agree.
Time for one more question.
Good comment, yeah.
It's Richard.
Thanks for the presentation, Dr. Sy. Looking at your presentation and the clarity of it, I'm very impressed. But I see a parallel between what you presented and what Mussolini represented back in the fascist years of Hitler. I don't see that there's much difference. It was his regime, he was a fascist branch, and it was called corporatism, where he basically took the power away from the people and handed it on to the corporates. Well, I don't see any different there. So what's your comments on that? Is there a
Well, there is a concept which agrees with what you said, which is, the name is fascism, right? Which is a collusion between corporations, or in this case, say, the banking system and government. And they in a sense, that's what we have. I mean, what we have is, in good times, the bank just run the show, right? When they fall over, now the government comes in and clean the thing up. So in a sense, what you said, is the case. I mean, it's just that when you use the name fascist, people think you're being very emotional and political, but if you stick to the definition and apply the definition, well, you may come to that conclusion.
They think that until the ABC gets raided.
You know what I mean?
The only major difference that I see is that Mussolini's influence was fairly restricted around the Italian economy and obviously a little further, but this is global. What's going on here is, what we're doing here is part of a global Mussolini.
Except that the little twist is that the collusion between them and the government are all different in different countries. We do not yet have one government. Maybe, in fact, we do have. We just don't know it. It doesn't matter who get elected. They will obey certain, instructions. Yeah.
There was a good book printed last year called Game of Mates.
Yeah.
And it actually names a lot of the people and the way that the revolving door.
Yeah.
And it's quite an interesting read, and especially about Adani and things like that. It's quite.
Yeah.
Okay, can I get everyone to give Dr. Wilson